Instead, social media services that I and others have built have torn people apart with alarming speed and intensity. At the very least, we have eroded our collective understanding as a country. At worst, I fear we are pushing ourselves to the brink of civil war.
The person you just saw is not a random person. It's Tim Kendall, Facebook's former director of monetization, speaking to Congress about online extremism and Facebook's role in fanning the flames. Oh, and by the way, this was in 2020. But before jumping to conclusions, let's dial it back and see where the war on information really began. A full-scale nuclear war was one push of a button away. In 1983, the world would have surely ended if not for the courage of this man, Stanislav Petrov. On 26th of September that year, the early response system, monitored by Petrov, reported an incoming intercontinental ballistic missile heading toward the Soviet Union from the US, after which 4 more were to be reported as approaching. Petrov, for his reasons, decided not to escalate the report and simply dismissed it as false alarm. Had he done differently, the outcome would have been devastating, with Soviet leadership likely to initiate a mutually assured destruction of the US. This just shows that one false information in the era of global destruction can mean the end to the world as we know it. Let's see the modern information wars. There is an invisible chess game going on. The players are well known, yet the play is hidden. Let's see how AI will make them move to defeat you, I, and us. The line of pawns is the tool of both education and the divide. They represent information on the board. Now, let's make a play and see what if this information comes at you. Epstein didn't kill himself. The things that we call information are quite tricky. When you hear Epstein being mentioned, you know it's an information. Or as its boring definition goes, knowledge obtained from investigation, study, or instruction. But if everything you hear is information, what is true and what is false? As an example, when you hear someone say, there are a lot of
illegal immigrant, illegal immigrant, illegal immigrant, illegal immigrant, illegal immigrant
in America. Is this true or false? The answer is that it depends. You see, the first challenge to modern information is, at its core, deciding what is true, what is false, and more worryingly, what's neither. Vagueness, indeterminacy, contextualism, fuzzy logic, all substitute the truth value of information in one way or another. That's why understanding the concept a lot of illegal immigrants in terms of being true or false is hard. It depends on the context and much more. What if, let's say, a political actor would infer from an information which doesn't have value of truth to it that the current government is corrupt and surely they do a bad job, and then would turn it into a campaign and a narrative that the country is mismanaged and the current administration is to be blamed for everything bad. If people understand different things under vague terms such as a lot, chaos can ensue about what to do with a lot of illegal immigrants. In order to understand this, let's take a look at just how much information really is out there. About 30,000 years ago, Paleolithic people began to paint shapes, images of horses, fishes, and hunters, finding for the first time external media to convey thoughts. Then slowly from the picture to idea to writing the words, we developed. From 30,000 years, it took about 28,000 to get to Hammurabi's Mesopotamia, where Hammurabi himself may have been the first literate king writing his own cuneiform. By 1997, the overall information created by humankind was estimated to be about 12,000 petabytes. To contrast it with capacities, in an essay written by Michael Lask, referencing Tom Lundar's estimation of the storage capacities of the human brain, they estimated it to be about 227 megabytes at that time. At that time, with about 6 billion people, it would have been some 1,200 petabytes altogether. the collective capacity of the human brain, which means that about 60 billion people could have kept everything known in a decentralized way. Now, by next year, by 2025, about 175 million zettabytes will be created, consumed, and stored on the internet. To give an idea of that size, if 1 petabyte would be represented by a single pawn on the chessboard, in 1997, humanity should have overseen about 75 chessboards altogether. By 2025, if we should have kept up with that pace, we should be able to keep in mind about 175 million pawns, which would roughly equal to 11 million games. And yeah, that is a lot of pawns. If this is information, how much can we actually say is misinformation? And most importantly, how does it actually spread on the internet? To understand this, let's take a look at the rooks. They'll represent the publishers responsible for writing information and misinformation. If you thought this is not going to be easy, well, you were right. Regarding its size, it's very hard to actually guess, because misinformation unfortunately blends into the fabric of the internet. We only have indirect approximations and other signs of its pervasive presence. Leading up to the 2016 US elections, an Oxford University research group found that out of 7 million tweets analyzed, polarizing and conspiracy sources accounted for 20% of links shared. It's no wonder why we don't trust the things that we read or hear. And on that note, in 2024, the Edelman Trust Barometer, measuring trust across social institutions, surveyed more than 30,000 respondents' opinion on the things they trust or distrust. 63% of people worry that government leaders are purposely trying to mislead people by saying things they know are false or are gross exaggerations.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
Well, we can get really excited because 64% of the same respondents feel the same about journalists and reporters, with actually businesses being the most trustworthy, with only 61% of respondents feeling that they're misleading people with a purpose. So yeah, people mistrusting institutions, social media platforms propagating misinformation, are all indirect signs that misinformation is ever present in our society. Otherwise, why would we not believe our own eyes? It is so much so that the World Economic Forum, in its latest report, showcases that respondents to their survey state that for the next 2 years, misinformation is the single biggest risk for societies. With recent elections in Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Mexico, Europe, UK, and with the soon-to-come US counterpart, about 3 billion people are to vote and engage in their civic rights to participate in democracy. A growing distrust of information, as well as media and governments as sources, this will deepen polarized views, and honestly, this could trigger civil unrest and possibly confrontation. And to actually let you in on a little secret, not only that, but governments themselves will be increasingly in a position to determine what is true, potentially allowing political parties to sort of monopolize the public discourse and suppress dissenting voices, such as journalists or opposing parties. Individuals have already been imprisoned in Belarus and Nicaragua, and killed in Myanmar and Iran for online speech. With all this context, policymakers, publishers, and people alike should look for the channel in which information and misinformation is propagated on the internet. Hence we arrive at the third and one, if not the most important chess piece, the queen, aka the social media platforms. What's weird about the internet is that if you lie about your friend George being a bisexual leopard, and you have some completely fake image to back up your claim, you're pretty much in it to win it. Whereas if George, your friend, is a regular, everyday, normal guy, you're not really going to go too far with that information. As ridiculous as that claim sounds, more ridiculous news spread on the platforms such as Twitter, leading up to the US elections in both 2016 and 2020. The basic concepts of truth and accuracy are central to theories of decision-making, cooperation, communication, and market. In a 2018 MIT study, researchers found analyzing Twitter that falsehood diffused significantly farther, faster, deeper, and more broadly than the truth in all observed categories. The effects were most pronounced for false political news than for news about terrorism, natural disasters, science, urban legends, or financial information. However, robots accelerated the spread of true and false news at the same ratio, implying that humans, not robots, are more likely responsible for the dramatic spread of false news. The results were dramatic. Analysis found that it took the truth approximately 6 times as long as falsehood to reach 1,500 people, and 20 times as long as falsehood to reach a cascade depth of 10. Now, are you, George, or the bots responsible for this? Probably everyone. You see, human behavior will determine what content will be most engaging, most shared, and most liked or disliked. It could be argued that the more outrageous, the more attention it draws, such as with the case of George. But honestly, my first belief that comes with the freedom to share such things is the responsibility as a counterpart. We, as viewers, have more responsibility now that we have more freedom. Responsibility to verify, to propagate, or stop propagating. It's tricky because there is something structural about these platforms that stops us from doing so, and that is a lack of incentives for users to share true content and avoid sharing false information. As Pavlov already showed with the dogs, we tend to select actions we believe will lead to positive feedback, carrots, and try to avoid actions that lead to negative feedback, the sticks. And unfortunately, sharing truth on the internet may come with less carrots. The real question for the companies working in media is, what if the truth doesn't bring enough profit? Dangerous as that question is, there is a layer of protection, in which, unfortunately, we have not much faith. Journalists, publishers, and media companies, including social media. These companies will encounter a sort of prisoner's dilemma. If I choose to be moral and always report the truth, other, less moral competitors may outcompete me, and I'll be out of the game fully, and there won't be even a chance for any truth to be shared. And structurally, social media platforms capitalize on our pretty natural tendency toward filtered engagement. These platforms build algorithms and structure compensation to maximize such engagement. By their very design, social media curation and recommendation algorithms are engineered to maximize engagement, and thus are predisposed to create filter bubbles. The queens indeed move very fast on the board. But before we jump to quick conclusions, we also need to contrast this information with the fact that the platforms also invest heavily in algorithms that verify or stop propagating misinformation. In order to get a better picture, we need to look at the checks and balances of these platforms. Fake news cost globally a lot. To be specific, about $78 billion annually. Anders Ansip, former vice president of the European Commission, has claimed Russia only spends at least about 1.1 billion euros a year on pro-Kremlin media to create disinformation. Besides that, scamming, direct results of fake news, vaccine-preventable diseases, and their consequences, and more amount to the 78 billion figure. But obviously, we can't expect that these companies just would sit around, basically do nothing about people and bad faith actors propagating misinformation throughout their platforms. Mark Zuckerberg in 2019 said they spend more than Twitter's whole revenue that year. Facebook spends about $5 billion per year, YouTube about $100–200 million, Twitter about $20–50 million. And to be fair, Google also doesn't allow content that makes demonstrably false claims, that could significantly undermine participation or trust in an electoral or democratic process. All of that is very good and should be applauded, but with the advent of generative AI, the scale of the problem is set to grow, with news sites appearing to be almost entirely written by AI, even in different languages. The question is, are these companies really profiting off of the misinformation to a larger extent than what they're paying to combat it? The answer should be yes, as there is a clear financial incentive for most platforms to maximize online engagement, which means that any content, factual or not, that receives clicks, likes, and comments is highly valued. Influencers who share incendiary, controversial content can become wealthy as a result, often leading others to replicate their style. Therefore, it is really unsurprising that many creators publish confrontational, simplistic, and emotionally charged content with us against them narratives. When the sites generating that misinformation have a revenue source that rewards virality by paying fractions of cents for each ad impression, there's a clear incentive to produce high churn, low quality stories shown as news. When married with artificial intelligence, that system becomes an even greater problem. According to a NewsGuard report, brands spend about $2.6 billion to misinformation websites each year. A study released by the Global Disinformation Index, a UK nonprofit that rates sites' trustworthiness, has previously estimated that 20,000 disinformation sites it analyzed pull in about $235 million a year. Google says it removes billions of ads each year for violating its policies, some of which target certain deceptive content. But it has no rule for fake news per se, partly because it sees accuracy as a publisher's responsibility, and partly because of the difficulty of defining the problem. You see, the lines between hyper-partisan content, state-backed propaganda, and stories concocted purely for financial gain are blurry at best. And it's also important to note, before putting the blame on anyone, that top marketers at many brands supporting misinformation through their ad placements are not doing so intentionally. Ad placements are done automatically through algorithms on digital advertising platforms. So, unfortunately, the math doesn't seem to prove that companies are directly profiting here. It just doesn't add up. And with that, we reach the last piece of the puzzle: the kings. They represent bad faith actors, often lurking among all of these pieces. But quickly, let's just jump back to Tim Candle's testimony for a second.
At Facebook, I believe we sought to mine as much human attention as possible and turned it into historically unprecedented profits. To do this, we didn't simply create something useful and fun. We took a page from Big Tobacco's playbook, working to make our offering addictive at the outset.
Facebook in particular has a rough history with defending their position as a mostly ethical company. In 2017, Chris Cox, Facebook's longtime chief product officer, formed a new task force to understand whether maximizing user engagement on Facebook was contributing to political polarization. Well, they found that there was indeed a correlation, and that reducing polarization would mean taking a hit on engagement. In a mid-2018 document reviewed by the journal, the task force proposed several potential fixes, such as tweaking the recommendation algorithms to suggest a more diverse range of groups for people to join. But it acknowledged that some of the ideas were anti-growth. Most of the proposals didn't move forward, and the task force disbanded. Even former employees described how hard it could be to get buy-in or financial support when the work didn't directly improve Facebook's growth. As a result, it received few resources and the project died. Many of its ideas stayed largely academic. Feel free to check out the sources to this video to see that there were other reports as well that there was an internal knowledge of the problem. I mean, Zuckerberg even admitted to this. In a public note outlining Facebook's plans for content moderation, he illustrated the harmful effects of the company's engagement strategy with a simplified chart. And I find this chart kind of funny because it really shows that the more likely a post is to violate Facebook's own community standards, the more user engagement it receives typically. Because simply the algorithms that maximize engagement reward inflammatory content. And I would just love to, stop here for a second and see what your thoughts are. How do you think AI will actually start influencing these processes? Tim Kendall, in his testimony, called social media the most powerful accelerant in history. Add AI to that mix, and basically what you get is an accelerant on steroids. Just imagine a giant system that gets fed your data and that feeds off of your insecurities, your anger, divide, and our lesser instincts. What do you get? No matter if it's Russian propaganda or your own state propaganda or corporate marketing, you will get that kind of content that you are more likely to consume. Add to this system misinformation and hate speech that actually evolve over time. In order to catch things before they go viral, content moderation models must be able to identify new unwanted content with high accuracy. But actually, machine learning models don't work that way. An algorithm that learned how to spot Holocaust denial, for example, may not be able to do so immediately when it comes to Uyghur genocide denial or Rohingya genocide denial. These are different types of events that happen. It must be trained on thousands, often even millions of examples of a new type of content before learning to filter it out. Even then, us humans, users, can quickly learn to outsmart models, unfortunately, by changing the wording of a post or replacing phrases with euphemisms, making their message more obscure to the AI, while still pretty obvious to a human. And this is why new conspiracy theories can run amok, and partly why, even after such content is banned, forms of it can persist on the platform. These previous examples showcase that there is a knowledge about the problems. There is also the power to change them if there is a will, and yet there is a conscious choice not to, because it would hurt shareholder interests and profits. This is especially the case with Facebook, but this can be found also with other platforms. So, unfortunately, the answer is a hard one. Well, it seems like humankind needs to touch back to its roots and rely on community and individual responsibility. Information, after all, is in our hands. We need to take the responsibility to decide what we do with it. If you thought we were out of the blue, well, there is more lurking, unfortunately. Like this video and subscribe to the channel, and tune in to episode 2 on the Information War series, coming soon, to find out more about what's really out there. I was your host, Matt, and you were watching The Y Club.
These services are making us sick. These services divide us. It's time we take account of the damage, and it's time we put in place the necessary measures to protect ourselves and our country.